Welcome to Clarity Connects, where we talk about the human essence in brands. I am your host, Touseef Mirza. All of us wants to create impact, but in this day and age of information overload and technology, it's really easy to feel lost. So it's crucial to get back to basics in order to gain the clarity we need to steer in the right direction. When it comes to brands, let's not forget who we are creating these brands for human beings. Therefore, understanding human attributes is essential, and not just from a customer standpoint, but also from a leadership and team standpoint, so that everything is aligned from the get-go. On this podcast, I will be interviewing guests that I'm completely enthralled with, that understand and provide guidance on how to connect effectively from a human perspective in the areas of branding, business, and marketing. The topics that we will be covering will range from personal branding, corporate branding, leadership, team building, and marketing. We will also give ourselves the space to contemplate on how to best utilize the power of branding, marketing, and business to create profitability and also genuine connection to human beings and positivity for the good of the world. Thank you for joining me, and now let's explore how Clarity connects for creating true impact. So hello, everyone. Welcome to the Clarity Connects podcast. I am your host, Touseef Mirza. I am so excited to start Clarity Connects to talk really about the human essence of brands. This has been a long time coming, and I'm just really excited to start this journey. So it's going to be a podcast really about seeking clarity to create true connection with human beings through brands and also with each other by looking at the different facets of brands, which I'm really considering a brand covering the practice of branding, business, as well as marketing. And the reason why I have all these three elements is because all of those three are really interconnected, and you can't really just talk about one without really influencing the other. So for today's first episode, I'm basically just going to be telling you a little bit about the podcast, the types of topics that we're going to be covering, and also I'm going to be saying my clarity moments that I've had in the past few years that have culminated to really create this podcast. So in terms of myself, just to let you know who Touseef Mirza is, I have over about 15 years experience in communications, marketing, and branding. And I've worn a lot of different hats, all the way from copywriting to account management to digital strategy to brand strategy. And I'm also the former CMO of the Advertising Research Foundation. I teach personal branding at NYU at the School of Engineering in the Department of Integrated Digital Media. I'm also the co-founder of the Core Connect conference, where we talk about marketing made human. I also run the New York Branding Meetup. This is a event that we do here in New York City, where people who really love to talk about branding come together, and then we have speakers that come in and we have discussions and mingle together. I am also a brand content and marketing strategy consultant, and I work with different types of organizations. One of the ones that I'm helping right now is with the United Nations Development Program. And I live in New York City and absolutely love being here. It's crazy and it's wild and it's full of passion, and it just keeps me on my toes, and I absolutely love it. So that's a little bit about myself. In terms of the podcast, Clarity Connects, the reason why it's called this way is because I am really a seeker of clarity. I've always been that way. I've always wanted to try to understand the essence of things, and I'm a purist at heart. And I've come to understand over the years that it's only once that you have clarity that you can understand which path to take in order to really connect with the people. And connection is where everything is at. I mean, that's what brands are trying to do. They're trying to connect with their consumers. That's where all of us are trying to do as human beings, is connect with people in terms of relationships and even connection with ourselves. But in order to get to the place of connection, you have to start with a place of clarity. And in terms of the human essence and brands, which is basically the tagline of the podcast, that's really coming from a perspective that at the heart of it all, if you really want to unleash the highest potential, including the highest potential of who you are, we need to recognize that at the core of it all, it's really the understanding and harnessing of the attributes of human nature and human behavior. And what I mean by that is really about understanding emotions, understanding the value that people have, so that you're really starting from the right step. And if we don't start that way, then we lose direction and we're trying all different things that might stick or might not stick. At the end of the day, you are a human being, you work with human beings, and you're trying to connect your products and services with other human beings. And that is really a part of clarity for me. That is the clarity that I got in terms of really understanding of where the principles of connections begin. So in terms of the topics that we're going to be talking about in our podcast, I'm going to talk about 5 main ones today, and I think that pretty much covers the arena, for now anyways, of where we're going to be going with that. And also, I want to make sure, again, that everybody understands that when I talk about a brand, it's not just about the brand, but it encompasses the practice of branding, business, as well as marketing. So the 5 topics that we will be covering, I'll just name them first, and then I'll just give you a quick explanation of each. The first one is personal branding. Number 2 is corporate branding. Number 3, authentic leadership. 4th is team building. And 5th is marketing and connection in the digital age. So for the personal branding, that's really from a perspective, like most people know what personal branding is. And I teach personal branding at NYU. I find that a lot of people, when they think about personal branding, they think about social media. And the way that I approach personal branding is, yes, social media is part of it, but it's really about 10 to 15%. Most of the work is actually really understanding who you are, what you want, what is your vision, which direction that you want to go to, what's your skill set, how do you want to present yourself in the world. And once you have that understanding, then it's a question of how are you going to best communicate that into the world, but not just communicate it, but communicate it in a way to influence the people you want to influence. And then after that, you can create the collateral materials such as social media to propagate your message. But again, it's really first about understanding who you are in terms of your values and what your belief system is first. And then the alignment becomes much more easier. The second thing that we will be focusing on is corporate branding. And from a corporate branding standpoint is to understand what is a brand identity. How do corporations come up with an effective, clear, and compelling brand identity? But beyond that, once you have a brand identity, how are you actually going to use that brand identity and operationalize it into experiences and into engagements so that people can actually understand who you are and what your product is or your service is? So that's number 2. Number 3 is authentic leadership. And you might be wondering, well, why we're talking about brands, why are we talking about leadership? Leadership is really important because that's where the main decisions are made from the get-go in terms of how the brand is supposed to present itself in the industry. And if the leader of a company or the senior leadership of a company don't have a clear idea of what they're trying to create, then that sort of thinking sort of trickles down to the team and as well as in marketing, and the customer will also feel that. Everything is connected. And also from an authentic leadership standpoint, if the leader of a company is more connected with his or her value system, then they can also extrapolate that and actually use that in the brand. So the more human you are and actually understand how to actually input that into the brand, you can actually then connect better with other human beings, such as the customer, because at the end of it all, we're more similar than different. Yes, there's target audiences and all that, and we will get into that. But I think we tend to forget that we are really much more similar and that we need to go inside to understand what clicks for us. And that might be an elemental area that other people can connect to as well as large. Number 4 is team building. So let's say the leader has a clear idea in terms of how to position their brand. Now we have to find creative and innovative ways to make that come to life. And I really believe with so much saturation right now in the market, it's really important for teams and businesses to differentiate themselves through innovation, through imagination, and coming up with more interesting ideas. But in order to do that, you have to be able to create an environment for your team to come up with these ideas. Again, we're going back to the human essence of things. We need to understand what type of environment and what do people need on an emotional level to be able to be creative. And that is, for example, to create a safe space and a nurturing space. So whatever idea comes through is actually that it feels good for the people, that they don't feel judged. And once you have that, the ideas can really come through more easily and more powerfully. And the 5th topic, which is marketing and connection in the digital age. So I know there's a lot of talk about this one all the time. This is really in terms of the output and connecting with the consumer. So we're going to be talking about that as well. I think it's important to understand where the culture is at and what type of mindset they are in. Beyond just a target audience. It's also important to recognize that the way that you're going to connect with them, I know that we use technology to reach our audiences, but again, from a human essence perspective, you need to understand where emotionally are the consumers that you're trying to reach in terms of their value system, in terms of really giving the proper message in story form, because that is still the way that we find content the most interesting and we remember it much more. And that really goes back in terms of, how we feel about stories. We just enjoy them. So these are the types of things, again, to really focus on a human essence first. And then you can always use the tool of technology to amplify all your efforts. So those are the 5 main topics. What I'm going to really try to do in this podcast is not just to give answers. I think there's a lot of obsession of having the right answer and getting it quickly. I think it's important to step back and actually have a space for contemplation and think about, is this really the right way we're doing it? Or is there another way? Or are we missing something? And not necessarily get to the answer right away. Because sometimes it is through contemplation that we unravel something that we didn't even know was there. And that is a point of clarity. And when we have that clarity, then we can go in a different direction or the right direction or can sprout all other types of ideas. So the way that the conversation I want to move through is from contemplation to clarity and then strategizing. Because I do agree also of just contemplating for the sake of contemplating is fun, but it's not really moving the needle. But just moving the needle for the sake of moving the needle, sometimes that's ineffective too. So you need to look at it at a holistic perspective. In terms of who will be speaking at my podcast, I love people in general. Like I really get excited by people who turn me on. I go to a lot of conferences and I really want to bring to the podcast people that really excite me and understand how the human essence function in all these areas that we talked about. So since you probably noticed, the topics, they get pretty broad. That landscape is pretty wide. So the different types of interviews that I will have will cover people who are brand masters, like who have written books on branding, people who are brand practitioners at companies, business leaders that are not necessarily in marketing, but that are leading a company and they're doing it in an authentic way. And then also people who understand how to build creative teams, that are productive, that are happy, and so more interesting ideas can sprout from that. We're also going to be talking about to people who understand how to market efficiently, for example, through storytelling in the digital world. And I'm also really want to bring people, which I feel we don't talk about as much, but people who are really in insights and who look at human behavior, who look at culture, because that's who you're trying to reach. You're trying to reach the people, and it's important to understand their mindset and really pause and take a full understanding of where we're at. And so I want to bring people from that perspective as well. So one of our just to give you an example, one of our very next guests, not very long, probably like the third or the fourth episode, is going to be Janneke van Hoyns. She is the head of analytics and insights at Google. And we're basically going to be talking about, for example, with the Google organic search, what are the different things that are coming through in the past year? What are the different terms that people are using to search for things? And that has a lot of information. And Google does that. I mean, Google search, we all use Google search every day. It's probably the biggest database of data on human behavior that we know. And they have an insights team. So that's what I want to talk with her and also see not just what's happening right now, but what's happened in the past 2 years, and do we see an evolution of something? Is there certain things that are being maintained in terms of human behavior, or is there certain things from an insight standpoint that is really changing, depending on the political landscape, depending on the cultural landscape? So I just find these types of conversations really interesting, and really for me, it triggers a lot of ideas for myself as well. Other stuff that we would be talking with Janneke as well would be how does Google actually look at the data to come up with the insights? And also, how do they work with brands in order to use the data that they have at Google to help brands position themselves better when they market? Aside from also interviewing my amazing guests, like today, I will also have personal commentary, just because I have something theoretical that I want to talk about, or something in terms of observations that I want to talk about. So I'm going to be doing that as well. And because I go to conferences a lot, that's one thing that I would love to share with all of you, is just to have, a few clarity moments of a conference that I went to, just so all of you are also aware in terms of what's happening in different event spaces as well. And you can let me know once we start to know each other. Let me know what resonates with you more. And, I would love to have this type of conversation to understand what works also with you, what you find interesting, and we can grow like that together. The last part that I wanted to talk about in this podcast was, since it is Clarity Connects and it's about clarity first, I wanted to just name 5 clarity moments that I've had in the past few years that have really brought about all different types of endeavors, including the Core Connect conference, including this podcast of Clarity Connects. So the first thing is the true definition of branding. I really started to get into what branding is about 4 or 5 years ago. And it was really by accident that I realized that my heart and soul is really in that realm. And it was really because, all right, just to give you a short story, I've been always, about 5-6 years ago, I really started to get into content strategy. And a lot of people have different definitions of what content strategy is. For me, content strategy is really about what is the content that you need in order, and how to communicate that content in order to basically connect with your audience in the most effective and compelling way. Different people have different definitions of content strategy, such as an editorial calendar for social media, and that's fine. But I have my own definition. And so I was using content strategy for the digital mediums, and I was working in digital strategy. And I decided, you know what, I'm just going to quit my job and I'm going to try to be a consultant and just go from there. That was an awesome decision because it really enables you to just create your own world, and you can read about anything and think about anything and dismantle stuff and rebuild stuff, and it's a lot of fun. So when I started off on my own, before getting clients, what I decided to do is I said, you know what, I'm going to do my own market research. I'm just going to reach out to anybody who gives me the time of day for like 10, 15 minutes. Who are either leading a small company or solopreneurs or leading a startup. I wanted to go more towards smaller companies because I was just attracted to that and get more sort of like a personal connection to the leaders that way. And what I would do is when I would meet these leaders, these people who were making the decisions, I just asked them, so, how is your content doing? Are you happy with the way it's converting, and why not? And what I realized is that most of the people that I interviewed were not happy with the way their content was converting. And because I'm a purist at heart, and I kept asking more and more questions to understand why that was the case, I realized that the reason why they didn't know, the reason why their content wasn't working is because they didn't know what their brand was about. So what would happen was that one day they would talk about their product and services in one way one day, and another day they would talk about it in a different way through marketing. And that just confused the consumer because consumers we barely have time to do anything and quickly looking at email and doing all this other stuff. So if you're giving me mixed messages as a consumer, I can't even bother with that. That's too much for me to handle. So if you're not consistent in your messaging, then that's a really hard sell. But the reason why they weren't consistent is because they didn't really know what their brand messaging was. So I said, there's no point in creating content if you don't know what your brand is. Therefore, I have to become a brand and content strategy consultant. So it was really intuitive and in an organic way to get to the point of that's where it all happens. And if you don't have a clear idea of what your brand is, then your content will be misaligned, and therefore also your marketing can be misaligned. So it's really when I started to understand the real potential of what branding really is, and then all of that connection with emotion, then I was just completely hooked. And I can keep talking more and more about branding because that's my gaga and I love it so much. But I'm not going to go too deep in this right now. I probably already have. But in one of our upcoming episodes, I'm actually going to be doing a full episode literally on what is branding. And the reason why I want to do that is because a lot of people talk about brands and talk about branding, but they don't really understand the full scope of what it's about or the depth of it. And there's a lot of juicy stuff to talk about when we talk about brands. So that's going to be in an upcoming episode. So just a final thing before we go to the other clarity point is I also just love the branding really shows me the potential of connection to people. And even the amazing brand savant, I'll call her, Debbie Millman, she literally says that branding can be used to unify humanity. And I so believe that, because if you are aligning your brand from a value system that resonates with the people that you are connecting with, then you're unifying. This is all about connection and unification. But we will talk about more of this in the upcoming episode. The second clarity moment that I get since the past few years is that it's a little bit of what we're talking about right now, really, is that for businesses, brands, and marketing, that they really need to get back down to basics, especially in this digital age. I know that technology can be very enticing and it's the shiny new toy with digital, and everybody is just like trying to find the next tactic to do. And I get it. And I'm actually really pro technology. But I also think that technology is not going to solve all your problems. Technology is a tool to deliver what it is that you want to communicate. What it is you want to communicate, that is what is going to connect with people on an emotional level. So then it becomes more of a conversation about how do you integrate that human essence part with the technology part. And I think obviously it's possible, but we can't forget that, now we got this new thing in AI and now everybody's going AI and whatever we push through AI, it's going to work. It's not going to work. Well, maybe it's going to work. It can work, but your chances for it to actually working much better is when you have both things together. So I'm sure most of you know Gary Vaynerchuk. He's the CEO of VaynerMedia. He has tons of media all over the place in terms of his philosophy. One of the simplest things, which I found clarity when he said the following, and it really brought it home to me, which was that in order for you to create impact or create connection with whatever campaign you have or however it is that you want to connect with your consumer, you need two things. The first thing is delight, and the second thing is attention. So what does that mean? The first thing is delight is whatever it is that you're putting out in the world. It could be a message, it can be an ad, it can be a social media post, whatever that is, that needs to delight them. It needs to connect to them on an emotional level. And delight doesn't necessarily mean happy. It can be useful. It can be interesting. It could be discovery. It's something that delights them. The second part, the attention, is you have to be able to reach that person. If you don't reach that person, then the communication is just not going to go through. So you need both. So if you have an amazing message that really resonates with your audience, but you're not reaching them, it's not going to work. And the opposite is true as well. If you're reaching your customer, but whatever it is that you're saying to them, they couldn't care less about it because it's not in alignment with their values or they don't find it interesting, it doesn't matter either. So you really need a combination of both, of delight and attention. For the third clarity moment that I've had in the past few years is that, and this we talked a little bit about it as well, is that from a business standpoint is not just to focus on the customer when we talk about human essence and connecting with the customer, but it needs to start with the leader and senior leadership, and then team, and then marketing and customer. All of that is aligned and it has a trickle effect. So if you align the ship from the get-go in the right direction, then your chances of getting where you want to go are going to be radically higher than if all of these different segments are kind of scattered. The fourth, I only have two more. So I have many more, but for this podcast, I'm just giving 5. So for the fourth one, this is something that is really near and dear to my heart. It's something that really Cindy Gallop, who's really an amazing pioneer in marketing and empowerment and just a force of nature. I heard her speak at a TED Talk on YouTube a few years ago, and she basically said that the future of business is about making money and doing good simultaneously. And when she said that, I felt something through my whole body go, oh my God, of course. Of course, that is the way it's probably happening. It's happening right now and in the future. And that's because of where we are in terms of culture. That culture is woke. And now people know that they matter. Now people know that everybody is a broadcaster and they can voice their opinions directly through social media. So because of that, now brands need also to be accountable. And so if I don't like your brand, and we see it all the time, right? Like if there's a brand that does something with a faux pas, then the people go on Twitter and they say, okay, hashtag boycott so-and-so, or just give them hell. And so now brands can't just talk the talk anymore. They have to walk the walk. So I also really believe in this mantra and this belief system that basically how can you use the power of brands, of business, of marketing for genuine connection with humans, for profitability, and also doing good and create positive change. All of those things are doable. It's just a question of finding the right business model and having the right reason to do it. And the fifth clarity moment that I will end with is, well, because I am a relentless optimist. I always look at things in a positive light. That's just who I am. And I really believe that the future is bright if we really marry the human aspect and technology together for business, for marketing, and for brands. And I do love technology. But again, technology needs to know its place. And that goes the same thing with artificial intelligence. I think artificial intelligence can be a tremendous tool. But again, it needs to serve us. And we need to recognize how we want to use technology to work for us. So those are my 5 clarity points for this episode. I am going to finish off with an amazing quote by the absolutely lovely and inspirational Maya Angelou, when she said, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." Now that's clarity. So simple, and we all feel that deep down inside. We all know this, but we tend to forget it. We tend to forget that at the end of the day, we are all emotional beings, and the way we feel is so important. Not just how others make us feel, but also how we feel about ourselves. So I hope this episode showed you a little bit of what I'm going to be talking about, and I'm super excited to embark on this podcast journey with you. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to sharing more thoughts on how to bring the human essence into brands. Have a lovely rest of your day. Bye.